Okay, in this video we're going to talk about how airplane engines actually work. So you can see here we have pretty high level, somewhat detailed flow of how this specific engine, the Lycoming O-320 E2D, is wired up. And as part of the DBE oral exam, the examiner may ask about specific components, may ask to even open the engine cover and actually point out each one. We're not going to show any actual engines. I don't happen to have one handy, but for the purposes of the oral exam, I think it's important to understand, not just like from the checklist, what's your procedural flow, but like what's actually going on literally under the hood. So to that point, I put this diagram together to help me understand it, and hopefully it helps you. So starting, I think it helps to start with like a basic understanding of what's going on in this diagram, and then we'll kind of go through some scenarios. So to actually start the engine, there has to be fuel in it, and so to achieve that, we would prime the engine. It's usually a hand pump in the cabin on the dashboard, and so you can see I've activated the primer here. Normally it's like 3 pumps to get it going, and that actually bypasses the intake manifold. It's not very clearly shown here, but bypasses the carburetor and the gascolator, so it just takes gas directly from it does get fed from the gascolator, and actually sprays gasoline directly into the cylinders. In this case, the Lycoming 320 has 4 cylinders, and so it's going to inject gas into all of them. This obviously only applies to the carbureted models, so this is an O-320 as opposed to an IO-320. Your fuel injected model might definitely works differently, but since I'm training on a 172M, it is carbureted, naturally aspirated, or normally aspirated, and so that's what I'm showing here. Your mileage may vary. And so from the primer stroke, from the primer, we're sending gas, fuel directly into the cylinder. And if you're familiar with the 4 phases of the engine, the 4 strokes, that's the intake phase. Once the engine's running, that gas actually comes from the carburetor, which is a mixture of gasoline and air from the ram inlet, from the air inlet, and then is optionally heated by the carburetor heater, by the carb heat, which is just a shroud around the carburetor that receives, it's heated by exhaust gas indirectly. We'll leave that off for now. We'll talk about carb heat later and why it's important. But from the intake stroke, the battery is powering this starter. The starter will get the engine going when you turn the key and then disengage, so it doesn't get destroyed at the full RPM range of the engine. And in this case, we've got 2 magnetos which generate a spark. So when you turn on the engine, both ideally are firing. And so as per the POH, we'll set the throttle to 1/8, which is about 13%, kind of hard to do with the slider there. The mixture is full, and so that is the amount of air being mixed in the gascolator by the venturi. That's a whole nother video that we'll get into later, but just understand that it's not just gas, it's air that's also going into the intake manifold. So we've got a full mixture as per the POH. By default, the ignition switch is with both magnetos on, and then the POH also says to have carb heat off. And so once we hit the once we ignite the engine, what's going to happen is the two magnetos will start sending sparks to this directly to the cylinders at the right stage so that they ignite that mixture. So the starter rotates the engine, rotates the crankshaft, which creates compression. The piston closes down and compresses the fuel air mixture, and then we start. So now we can see sparks going from both magnetos to ignite the mixture, which creates the power stroke, which is where that mixture is ignited and moves the piston and rotates the crankshaft, directly spinning the propeller, because this is a direct drive. So the speed of the RPMs of the engine is the RPMs of the propeller. And that's the power stage. And so, well, at that point, the momentum of the engine moves the piston back, and that exhaust gas exits and then is optionally used to heat the shroud around the carburetor, so that we're under some conditions that cold air or the outside ambient air, when mixed with fuel, can actually cause icing. The fuel lowers the freezing temperature of the air and can cause bad performance in the engine. So that's to be avoided. And as part of normal startup, we also, just to close out, that is the exhaust stroke of the engine. So that's all four strokes: power, or intake, compression, power, exhaust. And I guess just to close the loop on the whole engine, the other component here is the cooling system. It's cooled by air and by the oil flowing through the system. So we have an 8-quart wet sump, and then a engine driven. So once the engine's on, it's driving an oil pump that moves oil through the filter into the bearings and rings, and then into the oil cooler that is cooled by the air intake. And then it flows back to the sump. Other things that are engine driven, the alternator, which allows the components to run off of generated electricity as opposed to battery. We've got a whole other section to cover on electrical that kind of walks through that in more detail. And then the vacuum pump, which, among other things, creates suction for your attitude indicator, the artificial horizon instrument on the dashboard. And so, yeah, as part of our run-up procedures, for example, if you've ever wondered what's going on, you set the RPMs to 1700. This diagram, it says 1800. I think that's slightly inaccurate, but we'll try to get to 17. And then you want to test the those magnetos, so there's an expected amount of RPM drop when only one of the magnetos is sending a spark. So there's less power for that power stroke because there's less energy being sent to each of the two spark plugs in each cylinder. And so we can see the RPMs actually do drop here as we toggle through it. That's programmed, but that's actually how it works in real life. There's less power. Then we go back to both, and we do actually get an RPM drop on carburetor heat, but that's a different mechanism altogether that we'll get into later. So that's the end-to-end flow of how the engine's working, and I think a lot of that does come up on your on your oral exam for any number of pilot certifications or licenses. Certifications isn't the right word, but that one's evading me right now. So if you have any questions, send me a message or post a comment. Thank you.